So we are here to talk about why Jeff hates Mike Israetel. Jeff, what's going on, man?
Well, I mean, first of all, I like their content and I've liked it for a long time and I've probably watched hundreds would be an exaggeration, but I've watched certainly dozens upon dozens of hours of their stuff. I bought their book. And so like it's certainly not hate. I would classify it more as disappointment and maybe confusion. Because I have seen some big changes in their content over the past year or so. And then maybe just some disagreements, which is pretty normal. And it kind of depends on who the content is coming from. You know, if V-Shred puts out some trash content, that's barely worth talking about because it's sort of
Right.
expected.
At this
But
point.
I mean, Mike Israetel, I think it's a little bit more surprising. And so, you know, I've never been one to shy away from calling out things that I think are wrong. I mean, I was a Greg Doucette fan at one point. At one point, he was well respected in the industry, and not
Yeah.
that long ago, 3 years or so, people held him in fairly high regard. And so, credibility is something that is a little bit hard to gain and quite easy to throw away. And so that's sort of why I made the video. And it's not the first time I've made a video about them, and um, might not be the last. But yeah, if I have a disagreement with someone's content, I'm not afraid to make a video about it. I don't see anything wrong with that either.
Yeah, I think credibility is always kind of evolving if for some throughout somebody's either time on YouTube or whatever they're doing. I haven't decided what my sellout arc is going to be yet, so I got to figure out something very pricey to put out on the channel, but soon. So,
Soon. Oh,
yeah. No, so I saw the video, and obviously, I've had Mike on the channel. I like Mike when I've had conversations with him and everything. But yeah, I would agree that there have been some of these changes, and I think you made a point that I've talked about before, where ultimately a lot of like, so for people who maybe don't know some background, a lot of this stuff, I think it's with technique cyborg. Is that the term that he uses, right? And so there have
yeah.
been these Instagram videos, and I think they even have a contest where they're saying like, who has the best technique, and it ends up being almost a very unnaturally strict form with very light weight, generally demonstrated by people with less than impressive physiques, and it is almost like a caricature of what good form is supposed to be, taken to such an extreme where it's like, is this even stimulative to any of what the goals would be? And so that's kind of what the base here of the discussion is. So I don't know. Before we get too much into it, Cass, I mean, you're familiar with what we're talking about then with Mike's videos and whatnot.
Yeah, and I watched Jeff's, and I think like 4 or 5 other reactions actually before
Yeah.
this. So apparently this is a hot topic. I am not a part of the team Forum, so I just want to throw out that I I don't know all of the context of what the intention behind the, Technique Cyborg videos is. I've seen a couple exchanges with Mike and other people, and I asked him if he wanted to clarify it because we were just randomly talking before I got on here, and he didn't offer anything additional. So I'm just going with what I've seen on Instagram.
Yeah, and I thought you'd be an interesting person to get on because I know for the most part Jeff's thoughts on form and whatnot. And whereas with you, Kassem, you obviously put a ton of time into getting form and exercise selection correct. And but yet, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't think that necessarily comes with you saying, one, necessarily it's all about complete full range of motion, but two, this sort of almost like slow, exaggerated tempo. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that's, you could probably have a different insight than maybe Jeff or I would have. Because I think Jeff and I are generally on the same page there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when people are looking at this and saying people are focusing too much on perfect technique when by default then what you're saying is what they're trying to do is the perfect technique, where I think a lot of people would be like, actually they're just trying to perfect what I would say is not the ideal technique in my mind,
Right.
right? You know, you could argue, okay, is full ROM at all cost, is that the scale for perfect technique? And I would say, well, no. So my philosophy is that if you're choosing good exercise selection, then all of a sudden that should reduce all of the technical challenges, opening up more options for faster, slower, or whatnot. Like if you're choosing good exercises, you tend to be able to do them without having to have 50 cues and go super slow, and things like that. And a lot of times the range of motion is built in there. And I also don't think that simply being more flexible or a smaller individual is a product of technique. And I think that's what, at least what I'm seeing is like, oh, it just, maybe are these just the videos of the people with the most mobility because they're flexible and they're small. But to me, those aren't aspects of technique. Technique is how you do the motion, not how much can you flex because you have space at your hip joint and you don't have a lot of muscle in the way, et cetera.
Sure, sure, yeah. And just, I mean, as far as the, I guess, almost overarching topic, Jeff, that you had made about, and I think it was Alex Bromley who said Renaissance periodization that jumped the shark and whatnot. And so, not to discuss it in this horrible way, but it is interesting to see, because at the end of the day, like, we are people who all respond to positive feedback. I've discussed this in terms of the type of training people do, right? Where it's like, well, did this person have this perfect technique to become a bodybuilder, or did they respond really well and then they gravitated towards something they were good at? Well, in the same way, we could talk about that with career. We could talk about that with how you display YouTube videos and whatnot. And it just is the reality that these sort of clickbaity titles will get more views and you're going to respond to that. I mean, of course, Greg Doucette did that to an extreme degree. We've talked about Gregor Gallagher, Kinobody, the different persona he may have on Instagram versus on a podcast. There was another good example that I was thinking of the other day, but I know even Mike has said this. Mike had mentioned how he literally consulted with somebody who was basically like some social media expert and said, like, to do this and that thing, and then it worked and then it grows. So it's like I can't necessarily fault it. It's just interesting because sometimes I wonder, is it even possible to be genuinely authentic and still continue to capture a large audience? And I don't know if I can think of many examples of that. I mean, they're here and there, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah, so one thing that struck me looking through the Technique Cyborg, I went through Mike's entire Instagram for the past year and a half or so until
Mhm.
they stopped showing up, basically. They were amazing at first. At first, they were actually really good technique. Something that if I saw, I'd be like, wow, that was a fantastic set. Pushing hard, reasonable weights, bar slowing down at the end, holding on to the technique, very controlled, yet also aggressive and explosive. All these things that I look for in a set if I'm either coaching someone or just, being a perv in the gym, etc. But I didn't see that in the past like few months that he had posted. They were getting worse, much worse. And some of the recent ones that he posted were ridiculous, like absolutely absurd, to the point that I think deep down he knew it was shit. He knew it was shit, and I think he posted it just to get the clicks and the views, et cetera, and the engagement. Because as you said, we respond to incentives. And I think
Did
Mike
you
has never been
notice?
shy about putting out his, he's never been shy about putting out his controversial opinions, if they're right, if they're wrong. And so it kind of begins to be a horse leading the cart kind of situation, or maybe the reverse, right? It
Hmm.
starts where you believe something, you say it, it gets engagement, the post as well. But then you start thinking, okay, well, what can I post, even if I don't necessarily believe it deep down, to get that engagement, because that is where I'm getting my dopamine fix, or that is what is driving the business, which a lot of people are now relying on because we've hired a bunch of people, etc. And so a lot of people actually comment on the video, oh, but Mike doesn't actually say people should train like this. And these people thought that I had just picked these clips from the internet. No, they were from Mike's Instagram.
Mhm.
He posted these, he signed off on these. And so I think it really was sort of selling your soul to the algorithm. And I can think of a few different cases where someone hasn't really clickbaited and they've done very well, like Sam Sulek. I mean, it's really just like chess day number 7, and then that's it, you know. And there are a few other examples. Does it help growth? Absolutely. But I also think that you can't do this kind of stuff, especially if it's a very rapid change from your old content, and expect no one to notice, because it is a little bit suspect. And I think that, yeah, maybe it should be called out, because if no one calls it out, it just becomes normalized. Well, now the entire internet is just sort of curiosity gaps and clickbait, and ultimately it's the viewer who suffers.
Yep.
Did you notice as you were going through those a significant increase in engagement as they started to change?
Yeah, no. There would be some where and maybe some of them were posted by mistake, right? Like it was, maybe he didn't check them as thoroughly or something, or he was like, okay, this guy's small, it's a little bit ridiculous, but like it's full range of motion, it's controlling the eccentric, so like it fits the 2 categories that matter. And so he posted them, and then normal people are like, this is ridiculous. What is this? This is not what I expected. And it got, instead of maybe 50 comments, it got 500. And then, I mean, we all know that for social media, 5% of your posts that do the best are growing like half of your audience, right? Those last ones that just blast off, that is what grows your channel account subscribers, followers, or whatever. So yeah, I think he probably just is responding to the incentives of social media, which maybe partly the platform is to blame, but I think at this point he knows what he's doing, and I think it should be called out. I mean, he's not the only one doing it, but that doesn't mean it's right.